Hello and welcome to part 2 of Ye Olde Guide's historical journey through Stockport. I'm Liam McGrath, joined once again by Ye Olde Guide's historian Daniel Gooch. In part 1, we explored Stockport's political story and the rise of its industries. If you haven't heard it yet, it's well worth a listen because industrial innovation is at the very heart of the town's identity and growth. Stockport became a hub of textile ingenuity and earned global fame as the world's leading centre for hat manufacturing. You can catch that episode along with loads of others at yeoldeguide.com. Today, in part 2, we turn our attention to Stockport's rich arts and culture, then look at how its urban landscape has evolved. Finally, we're going to wrap up this tour of Stockport with our own perspective on how the town's reality measures up against expectations. Arts and culture. Well, in this category, we discuss the artistic and cultural influences of Stockport, and we're trying to find the big deals that go well beyond the town. A fair few very well-known bands have recorded influential music in Stockport.
Yep. I don't think it's much of an exaggeration to say that practically everyone listening to this podcast will at some point in their lives have heard music recorded in Stockport at Strawberry Studios. This was a recording studio in operation from 1967 to 1993, which hosted some of the biggest names in Northwest music. A plaque on the wall of the old building lists some of the musicians who recorded there: Joy Division, New Order, Paul McCartney, the Stone Roses, Simply Red, the Happy Mondays and the Smiths, plus local band 10cc who set up the studio. We should talk more about them given that it was their studio. They were a soft rock band famous for their song I'm Not in Love, and they recorded that very song along with lots of their other work at Strawberry Studios. And the band personally invested in and ran the recording studio, so in a sense became this kind of self-contained musical unit within that building in Stockport.
Let's tell us about some of the most well-known music recorded there.
There were lots, but just some of the major albums: Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures in 1979, seminal post-punk work; New Order's first album, Movement, in 1981; the Stone Roses' first single, So Young. It was also, sorry, we had to get a mention of football in here, used by several northern football clubs to record their club songs that you used to record when you got to a cup final. 10cc even wrote a song for Manchester City, which was recorded there. One of the key innovations at the studio was use of new atmospheric delay effects, particularly on Joy Division's drumming sounds. All the Joy Division music there was produced by Martin Hannett at the studio, and his production techniques helped change songs which previously had a heavy punk noise to this kind of moody post-punk atmospheric sound. The studio was situated in Stockport and moved there from the earlier inner city studios slightly elsewhere, a rare professional recording studio outside London, and it was named after the Beatles' song Strawberry Fields Forever. Now, while the studio isn't open anymore, there is a great exhibition about it in Stockport Museum. I sat there for ages listening to Unknown Pleasures. I had to drag myself away just because I didn't have time to stay there for any longer. And I thought the museum exhibit was brilliant, completely unexpected, and I was there much longer than I planned. It's a great museum.
Yeah, me too. I was there for longer than expected as well. Lots of interviews from people that recorded there and that were influential, and in particular, the coverage of Unknown Pleasures. And it really ties in with, there's almost like a musical scene that's in Stockport that's around this recording studio. There's a walking tour called the Stockport Music Story Trail, and unfortunately I didn't have enough time in Stockport to go on it. It's run by a guy called John Barrett. I'm not sure how often it runs, but they've got a great website and indeed a podcast, would you believe? And they produce a pretty cool music map with like 200 hand-drawn illustrations with all the sort of the bands and people associated. I understand it that John and his wife Rosemary have been putting on music and cultural events in Stockport for years, and this really keeps this legacy alive. And the staff at the museum were recommending events put on by John. And so, I sometimes think when you visit a town, you want to be there longer to sort of get into these things. So I think the residents of Stockport are lucky to have this continuing musical heritage.
Definitely.
Moving from music to art, I think it's inevitable that we have to talk about the Lowry paintings in Stockport.
Yes, we should. L.S. Lowry made quite a few paintings of Stockport. As a reasonably sized industrial northern town near his home, it's really no surprise he made it one of his subjects. One of his most famous Stockport paintings was of the wide-stepped Crow the Street in 1930, which forms the cover art for a book I've got just near me now on the history of Stockport. But he also depicted the steps above the cell we mentioned earlier on Mealhouse Brow and Stockport Viaduct, compositing this into kind of imagined industrial scenes.
Stockport Viaduct is worth another word here, as it's used in several paintings. It's one of the country's largest brick structures, and it was built nearly 200 years ago. It's remarkable to think, in 1840. And the arches, they're about 19 metres wide each, which is large enough that the M60 motorway, which has 3 lanes plus a hard shoulder in each direction, the motorway can fit comfortably through the arches. Lowry used this as a overarching representation of the industrial architecture in his art. And I guess the viaduct and the chimneys of Stockport would have been meat and drink for Lowry. And again, the Stockport Museum has a good Lowry exhibit, so I can't really praise the museum enough. The museum also covers a bit of the sports of Stockport, and very famous sportsman from Stockport, whose polo shirts I know you like.
I don't have any now, not anymore. Fred Perry. Fred Perry was born in Stockport in 1909. For a very long time, was the last British man to have won the Wimbledon men's singles title until Andy Murray finally managed it. He was born there in 1909. He moved away as a young boy, but he was a true child of the town because his father was a cotton spinner there. He's commemorated by Fred Perry Way in the town, and he has a blue plaque on his former home at 33 Carrington Road. Another sports star from Stockport I'll definitely mention is John Amaechi. He's a British basketball player, born in America, but brought up and educated in Stockport, which is where he started playing basketball. He became successful in the NBA, and he's pretty famous for his success there, but he's also notable for his post-playing media and psychology career and for coming out as gay, one of the most high-profile sportsmen to do so. He's definitely a well-known name in this country.
There are a couple of well-known figures there in sport. And, whilst we talked about a lot of bands from the 70s, the 80s, there is a more recent band from Stockport, Blossoms, who are named after a pub in the town. I believe the pub is just called Blossoms.
Yep, I think that's right. Are you a fan of Blossoms?
I listened to them in the museum, actually. I thought they were all right.
No. Excellent. I think I saw them once, possibly supporting Muse. I can't remember much about them, but yep, they were definitely in the museum.
Well, we'll have a listen to them after this. Now, you did mention football very briefly, but you normally talk football. I thought you'd talk a bit about the Stockport County football ground, but you've managed to resist the temptation. I thought you'd really like their football ground.
I did get to go. It was a lovely ground. Had a great time there. I wish Ipswich will play a game there. That would be fantastic.
Edgeley Park. What league are they in now?
They're in League One. I think they made the League One playoffs last year, so I was definitely backing them. I did quite fancy a trip to Edgeley Park, but not to be.
Proper football club. Right, brilliant. Well, we've reached the end of the arts and culture category. What are your thoughts in summary?
Well, before I started researching Stockport, my first thoughts went to Warrington. One of the things we mentioned in Warrington in this particular category was the difficulty in creating a separate cultural identity from your giant neighbour. With Warrington, you had Liverpool. With Stockport, you have Manchester. But I don't think you can say that about Stockport. It's more that it's kind of played a role in helping to craft and shape that Northwest musical culture. It's large enough that plenty of actors, sportsmen, musicians, and other media personalities have come from the town, too many to list. So we've concentrated on those whose work has a real connection with the town. And I think also it's so well celebrated within Stockport Museum, as well as some of the other points you've mentioned. Stockport Museum really is excellent. I love a local history museum that defies expectations. And it wasn't just a list of all the factories and engineering and things that have gone on there and the famous people there, actually gave you a sense of what Strawberry Studios was. And I think that'll be totally unexpected for many people coming into Stockport. So for me, again, it's not going to be the massive scores that someone like Liverpool would get, but I think it's still going to be pretty good. So for me, it's a 7 out of 10.
Oh, that is a good score. Now, I have to say, I'm slightly biased because I love all those bands that were recorded there. You can't beat Joy Division as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to give it a good score as well. I'm going to give it a 7.
Excellent. So that's 7 each. So yeah,
Very
for
generous.
me, I think what tipped it up was the celebration. I think most towns of that size could have some cultural history like that, but I don't think you'll see it as well celebrated as you would in the local museum as it was there. So that's what gave that extra boost for me.
Will the Ipswich Museum have an Ed Sheeran and Cradle of Filth celebration?
If it's
That's
got
what
a
I wanna
Cradle of
know.
Filth celebration, I will be there.
Well, we're now going to talk about the urban landscape and how Stockport has evolved this multi-layered but somewhat fractured urban character. Can you give us an overview of how Stockport grew?
Yeah, let's start in the 17th century when the centre of Stockport was properly formed. The earliest known map of Stockport shows its marketplace, church and Castle Hill as recognisable features. And at this time, the central town of Stockport, as opposed to the surrounding towns in the borough, was really the only part of the borough that was recognisable as a significant town. Expansion occurred in the early 1700s with ribbon development along existing roads leading to the town. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, expansion was gathering pace, and this time, whole street networks took over old agricultural land and gardens, often laid out in a kind of right angle pattern. And it was at this time that Crowther Street was built, the street made famous in a painting by L.S. Lowry.
Is that the one with the steps going up? Yeah, no, that is a famous picture. Quite a quiet road now, but one that you have to see and compare with the picture. So that expanded industrial town, I think I know the answer to this question, but was it a nice place to live in?
It wasn't to everyone's tastes. There was a saying in the 17th century, when the world was made, the rubbish was sent to Stockport. Now, we should be fair here. It's not clear what exactly this person was referring to. It's been suggested it could come from the Civil War and the political allegiances that were there, or from religious radicalism. So perhaps we should look at the evidence for how nice Stockport was. New workers' housing was built to hold the expanding population. This was usually built in terraces, and the conditions of those houses often weren't great. Engels said, "The cottages and cellar dwellings of the workers are even more unpleasant to look at. They stretch in long rows through all parts of the town, from the bottom of the valley to the crest of the hills." While, once again, Engels might have had some reasons to overplay this, the numbers do back it up and show a lot of overcrowding. The average number of inhabitants in each house in Stockport was 6.4 in 1821, and around 5 from the 1820s to the end of the 19th century, after a large increase in the number of houses built in the 1820s. As another marker of the poor living conditions, lots of people also just lived in cellars. About 13% of the homes in the town in 1842 were cellar dwellings. Engels said of this, "I do not remember seeing elsewhere in the Manchester industrial district so many inhabited cellars in proportion to the total number of houses." One source does describe a cellar dwelling in the 1850s, with a family of 5 living there. He said, "The sleeping place was excavated from a rock. Their beds were made of shavings on the ground, environed by a bestial filth and moisture." Really doesn't sound nice.
No. But to be fair, I think we heard these kind of stories in other episodes. Liverpool springs to mind, and for a very long period of its history, these kind of conditions. A lot of development in the 19th century. What about the 20th century? What happened in the 20th century? How did the town develop?
Well, there was an ambitious plan drawn up in 1945 for the redevelopment of Stockport that would have included a new market hall, civic centre, industrial zones, and a sports stadium. That plan never happened, but there were your classic post-war developments like new municipal facilities, courts, council buildings, police station, etc., built later, a new bus depot, shopping rows, towering blocks of flats, the old Sainsbury's on the site of the Park Mill, was demolished in 1979. All horrible, of course. Plus, of course, the classic late 20th century folly, a big motorway cutting through the town centre, something we see probably far too much in the oldie guide. The M60 today, or M63 as it was when it was built in the 70s and 80s, it doesn't quite cut the town centre up as much as some of the other monstrosities we've seen, like in Hull, but it certainly doesn't do Stockport any aesthetic favours.
No, I think it's a bit different, to be honest with you. I think it's the Manchester Ring Road, which happens to pass to the side of Stockport town centre. So it doesn't. It's not like a distribution right within the middle of the town, and it's very convenient for the town. But a major development in the town centre of the post-war era was the Mersey shopping centre. It's worth saying a bit more about this, Daniel.
Stockport is the start of the River Mersey, where two other rivers, the Goyt and the Tame, converge and run under the town centre as the Tin Brook. The medieval Mersey Bridge was an important crossing point from north to south, one of only three over the Mersey in the Middle Ages, and was broken during the Jacobite advance south. In the 17th century, one person said there were only two important things about Stockport, its market and its bridge. Now, the Mersey used to flow visibly through the centre of Stockport, and it is still there, but it's covered now by modern shopping areas. The covering looks like all modern development, but the first cover was actually made in 1935 to link Mersey Square, which had been built as a public space on both halves of the river. The Mersey was then constructed and opened in 1940 as a road. The start of the Mersey runs under the Mersey Shopping Centre, which was built on stilts over the river in the 1960s. There were proposals in the 2000s to fit glass panels in the pavement to allow people to see the Mersey running below, which sounds really nice, but unfortunately never happened. So you can see the river at either end of the Mersey, but it disappears completely from view once you're in there, and you wouldn't even know it's there.
Unless you're one of these urban explorers who I understand go down there and in the underworld of the Mersey.
Yes, there's certainly a lot of rabbit holes to get down on the internet with that, of people who've been exploring the tunnels underneath Stockport.
That's it. All right, so let's talk about some of the specific buildings in Stockport. There's some cracking buildings there. We've discussed this bottom layer, the River Mersey, and then on top of that, the Mersey Way, this post-war development. And then a sort of a level up from that is a couple of roads called the Underbanks, which are absolutely lovely, and we'll talk about those. And then right at the top, above that, is a layer that contains the marketplace, St Mary's Church, and the museum, and that market where you had the delicious vegan cake. And this area really forms the historic heart of Stockport, home to many of its most striking buildings and most historic buildings. Shall we talk a bit more about the best buildings in this area?
The historic centre of Stockport is really the area around Great Underbanks, south of the M60 on the Sandstone Cliff. There are lots of old 18th and 19th century buildings around the marketplace. We can pick out a few that are even older, though. Staircase House is one of Stockport's most famous buildings. It's named after its ornate carved staircase. It's the oldest house in Stockport, built around 1460, is shown by tree ring dating, but restored after a fire in 1995. Typically for houses of this era, it had a brick Georgian facade added, so it's even older than it appears from the outside. It's one of the only original pre-industrial buildings left around the marketplace. Part of the nearby parish church is the only older building left. Would you believe there are actually serious proposals to demolish it in the 1980s, but these were successfully fought by the Stockport Heritage Trust, and it's now a lovely tourist attraction, sharing entrance and facilities with Stockport Museum. We can also talk about Underbank Hall in the same area. It's now a bank. It's a 15th or 16th century townhouse. It's got a timber facade, and facade decoration was common in wealthy homes in this era, with timber still the main building material in Stockport up to the 17th century. It has certain other great rebuilding characteristics. They include glazed windows and was probably bigger when built, with an extension at the back and a wall and gate at the front. Three Shires is a 16th or 17th century house. It had a timber and decorated facade, but is smaller than Underbank Hall. And these two houses, plus Staircase House, weren't atypical of the wealthier homes in this time, but most people lived in much sparser houses, as we saw before. It's worth reflecting on the underbanks as well, as these are streets that are full of shops and bars and they run under some bridges leading into the market square. And you have to climb up stairs or steep streets to get from the underbanks to the market square. So it's really this kind of town centre of multiple layers.
Yeah, and I think this is the best part of Stockport, right? And it's hard to describe it and do it justice. So we've got a picture of it on the website for the podcast. But the underbanks contain these historic the buildings that you've mentioned, and of course at the marketplace. But they're sort of on top of each other. It's really nice and good place to stop for a drink. And something you do notice when you're walking around the underbanks is lots of pubs.
Stockport's pubs were really so great. I had to get in a quick review of the historic ones. The White Lion is the oldest pub in the town. Its earliest licence is from the 14th century, but my personal favourite pub was the Baker's Vaults. This is a gin palace, an ornate late Victorian pub inspired by the demand for gin. The current building was constructed in the 1840s when the marketplace was expanded.
To the southwest of the town centre, the land rises along the busy A6 Wellington Road, and here stands the impressive Town Hall, which was completed in 1907. It was designed in the English Baroque style by Alfred Bromwell Thomas, the same architect, as it happens, that designed the spectacular Belfast City Hall. Locals often call the Town Hall the wedding cake, thanks to its tall, layered clock tower. The building itself is exuberant in design. It's clad in Portland stone on the front and features a grand marble staircase. Opposite, you'll find the Stockport War Memorial Art Gallery. Built in the neoclassical Greek revival style, it continues to host exhibitions to this day, adding cultural depth to the civic quarter. Together with Millennium House nearby, these buildings form a distinguished cluster of civic architecture. And of course, some of the town's oldest landmarks are its churches, which anchor Stockport's story even further back in time.
St Mary's Church is the oldest building in the town, as is typical of churches. The Victorians got their well-intentioned hands on it and rebuilt it about 200 years ago due to the threat of erosion. But there are some old bits left. It still has its 14th century chancel, which is the space at the front around the altar, which is tacked onto the end of a newer building. It's a very obvious split. It's almost like a kitchen extension, really, is the best way I can describe it. A note on the chancel, because this allows my inner Pevsner to come out, it's built in a decorated Gothic style. This was the original English Gothic era style, characterised by ornamentation and decoration on the facades.
Good to get your inner Pevsner out. And I was struck when I was walking to the south of the town centre by St Thomas's Church, which has got quite an impressive Greek revival facade. So it's quite impressive churches. You mentioned the Mersey Shopping Centre. Anything else from the 20th century of note?
Yeah, the Plaza. This is an amazing Art Deco cinema and theatre built in 1929. We don't normally just cover town theatres, but this one really is notable, not just because of its architecture and furnishings, but because of its construction into the cliff in which it was built. You don't entirely get the impression now, but that's because, according to Ian Littlechild's, 10,000 tonnes of rock were dug out to a depth of 42 feet to enable its construction. It was closed in 1998 after a second life as a bingo hall, but reopened by a charitable trust in 2000. I'd also mention, as a symbol of Stockport's modern redevelopment, the Red Rock Leisure Facility opened in 2018 because Building Design magazine gave it their Carbuncle Cup, which is their award for the worst building of the year in 2018. Now, I'll agree that it's not great. The cheap-looking cladding reminds you of the way that someone like Goodison Park was mangled over the years. But I think to say it's the worst building in the country is a bit harsh. If you read the judge's comments, to be honest, the snobbery oozes out of it. It talks about foisting bad architecture on struggling communities and saying you feel sorry for the people of Stockport. Now, obviously, my perspective is also that of an outsider. It seems to be a popular and well-used centre and really no more offensive than many other town centre regeneration projects. It seems to have created cleaner paving and a more pleasant modern environment for that part of the town. And to be honest, it's less offensive to me than the ghastly post-war stuff that sits next to it or the drab grey car park it replaced.
No, fair enough. I don't think it's that bad either. Yeah. But, I think the Carbuncle Cup is just there to wind people up, isn't it? But I'd say modern development that is impressive in Stockport. And if there was an award that was the opposite of the Carbuncle Cup, there probably is. Sterling Prize might be going a bit far. But I would nominate the new bus station. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a transport fanatic. I think it is absolutely brilliant. If you haven't seen it, not only providing a proper bus station. I'm a big fan of proper bus stations, indoors, screens telling you when the buses are coming, warm toilets, things like that, rather than just shelters scattered around towns. Anyway, it's a great bus station, opened very recently, and true to the theme of Stockport, it's on 2 levels, so buses downstairs and a park on the roof. And the park has great views across the town and the railway viaduct. So top marks for bus station. And I suppose the other well-known building for 20th century is the sort of big pyramid thing, which I think currently contains the Royal Nawab Curry House. It's a ziggurat, which was originally the cooperative bank in the 1990s, and it's been in and out of use, and it's now a really large Pakistani banqueting hall and used for weddings and a restaurant too. And I'm sure the food is absolutely delicious, but it's a funny looking building and a bit of a local landmark.
I've looked at pictures of the inside. It's got kind of grand hotel vibes, really, or a restaurant. But I gather it's used for events in the same way a hotel might be. So, yeah, it's pretty cool, pretty unique.
So what are your thoughts on the urban landscape of Stockport?
I really liked it. This is subjective, but I love contrasting towns. I love multi-level hilly towns. And this is kind of one of the unique points about Stockport. It's rivers and railway lines crisscross each other at different levels. One person once said about Stockport, there is not in England a more irregular spot of ground, than that on which this town stands. When I came in, I was expecting a pretty generic Victorian industrial town with some modern development. That's there, but it's certainly not just that. It's really a kind of a combination of divergent planning styles and eras that may not directly complement each other, but do make the place fairly unique. So, yeah, I really liked it, and I'm going to give it a 6.5.
Oh, wow, it's a good score. I think there's something about the levels, isn't there? There's something about a bridge going over a road, or just there's something exciting about it. And I know it's hard to put your finger on what that is. I really love those kind of layered towns. I mean, in the UK, so we've not got many towns or cities that are quite as layered. Edinburgh springs to mind. Edinburgh's a place where you can be on a viaduct above some streets.
Definitely.
Bristol is certainly very hilly, but Stockport, it was unexpected to have those layers. Yeah, I'm not going to over romanticize it. There's parts of Stockport that are not the best, and where certain developments have not been as good. Areas that have been cleared, where mills haven't been preserved, but there are some good signs, particularly around the Hat Museum, the mills there, the bus station, as I say. I think for me, therefore, it's going to be a 6. We've got this final section called Reality versus Expectations, where we give the town a score based on whether it exceeded or met or exceeded our expectations. And the reason we have this is because places like Stockport are not so well known, and it's an opportunity for us to give a bonus score to reflect whether we were pleasantly surprised. And I think for me, Daniel, I thought the hilly architecture and the layers, I was pleasantly surprised. This would be a positive score for me. What do you think?
This almost links to what you were saying in urban landscape. It's got the good bits and it's got the bad bits. I'd say I don't think I've ever changed my mind so quickly about a town aesthetically when I arrived. I'd never been to Stockport before, so this really was a blank slate for me. My first impressions on arrival was it was a complete mess. I walked past the Garrick Theatre, which was, if you're going to have a carbuncle cup of the past, it'd probably be given to that. It's the ugliest building I've ever seen.
Terrible.
It looked derelict. I couldn't believe it was still operating. You had the A6 cutting up the town centre. I thought, this is not going to be a pleasant place. But once you got the other side of the Mersey way, it completely changed my mind. It was a much, much more pleasant place. As you said, you've got those different levels. You've got thriving market. You've got history presented at you in the architecture in the museum. Wonderful stuff. I think on the other categories, politics and war, not great. Is it expected for Stockport to be high? Probably not. In science industry, it has unique businesses and important innovations, probably where you'd expect its strengths to be. I think possibly, as well as the urban landscape, culturally is really where Stockport exceeded what I was expecting. You'd think that a town this close to Manchester would be completely culturally overshadowed by Manchester, kind of similarly to what we might have seen with Warrington and Liverpool. But instead, Stockport, I think, has played a unique part in the wider Northwest culture, particularly musical culture that's wrapped around that town. Whether it's music, the birth of factory industry, or whatever it may be. So I think Stockport has gone quite a long way above my expectations. So if we're starting at 5, I'm probably going to have to give it 7.5.
That's absolutely brilliant. I agree with all that. I would also add, and we say this often on the podcast, it's got some really good local museums. And in fact, we did an episode, didn't we, on local museums, because when researching this podcast, it makes all the difference having those really good local museums. And, the Hat Museum, the Stockport Museum at the Market Square, the Staircase House, both absolutely fantastic. And we mentioned the air raid shelter as well in the first part. So having those quality museums that bring together the thread of the story of the town and highlighting things like the musical importance for me really helps. And so for that reason, it does exceed expectations considerably. So I will give it an 8.
8, wonderful. So Stockport's done very well there. Let's run through the final scores. I have to go back and find them in my notes. We've got 3 each for politics and war, but it's only up from there. We've got science and industry, 7.5 from me, 7 from you. Art and culture, 7 each. Urban landscape, 6.5 from me, 6 from you. Relative expectation, 7.5 from me, 8 from you. So above average in all but one of the, or above the middle in all but one of the categories. That's really, really good. Welcome to Stockport.
Thank you for listening to Ye Olde Guide. You can find all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and pretty much every other podcast directory you can think of, as well as on our website at yeoldeguide.com. We'd love it if you could leave us a rating or review. It really helps others discover the show. And if we've missed anything about Stockport, we've got anything wrong, please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Ye Olde Guide covers numerous towns and cities, each with its own fascinating story. We also have special episodes, including our series on the growth of settlements, from their earliest origins through the Middle Ages into the Tudor and Stuart eras. And this series will continue as we explore the dramatic changes in architecture and the evolving role of cities during the Georgian period. We've got a special episode on the squares of West London too. Please keep an ear out for our upcoming city guide to Oxford, which is coming very shortly. So thank you once again for joining us. Until next time, this has been Ye Olde Guide.